Welcome. I'm County Commissioner Sally Clark. I know we have some other elected officials here in the audience. Thank you for coming. From both the city and the county. I know I saw Mayor Snyder here as well from Manitou. I don't know who else is here, but welcome. This is essentially what what you've been called here for is the post-fire watershed assessment. And we're really glad to be able to welcome Dave Roskin here to talk to us about what we need to know and help us prioritize the issues post-Waldo Canyon fire. What this isn't today probably is some of the financial piece of what we need to spend in the watershed. This is more about the projects themselves and how the mitigation will be looked at. So for those of you who are here, I don't think that Dave's going to be rolling out actual costs of all of this. We know that it's going to be substantial, but right now this is the beginning of us to pretty much look at what projects need to be done to protect lives and property downstream from the Waldo Canyon fire. I'm going to ask Brett Waters to say a few words as well, and then we'll let Dave begin his presentation. So thanks for coming.
Thank you, Commissioner. Just let me add, this study was really funded regionally, and so we had the City of Colorado Springs, El Paso County, many others, CDOT, that funded the study. This is a very high priority for us, obviously. We've worked very hard at doing this very quickly, and we want to thank Dave Roskin and his support for this, and CUSP and those who are involved. You'll see a lot of good information here, but we understand that not only are we talking about the burn scar, but many other projects that we will detail out later as well within the city and the county, obviously. So, again, thank you for coming. We feel this is a very good first step in moving forward. So we'll turn it to Mr. Roskin. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. I'll turn this on. That seems to work. Now, is that better? Before I get started, I'd like to introduce the key players who helped put this, the assessment as well as this design together and help them with the PowerPoints and all the stuff up to this point. They've been in the field. There's some other people in the room also. We're in the field as well, but the primary authors of what you're going to see today are sitting right here. This is my son, Brandon Roskin, and with Wildland Hydrology, and Sumner Collins works with us, and Jim Nankervis, consultant from Blue Mountain Consultants out of Berthoud. We've been working together for many years on a lot of stuff that's related. So as we get started into this, the thing that I think is, got going real fast, is the Carol Arcarius with the CUSP, Coalition for the Upper South Platte, was very instrumental in being able to get a hold of me, and we went down to the Flying W and saw their plight. And because we were working together on Trail Creek and the Hayman fire, we did the same analysis there, and we implemented the design, much of which you're going to see here, which has been very effective. And as a result of the work that we've done, Carol, with her contacts here, said, hey, is there some way you could help in terms of coming up with some of the solutions that were related to similar problems in just a different location from fire and post-fire effects? So we'd like to give credit, I know, to Carol for her dedication, basically trying to put a lot of people together. The other thing I want to say is that, you know, in this kind of work, it's when you're dealing with a watershed, and on this large of a scale of a problem, the only way that this stuff works is you got to neighbor up. And the good news is you guys neighbored up, because it's not one entity, it's not just one group, but it's a combination of groups who have basically partnered up or neighbored up to come together, including the Forest Service, the NRCS, Colorado Water Conservation Board, the Navigators, Department of Transportation, Colorado Springs Utilities, the City of Colorado Springs themselves, El Paso County, Colorado Water Resources and Power Development Authority, and the coalition, obviously, of the Upper South Platte, CUSP. So we want to basically thank those who have made it possible to do these studies and to bring kind of the combined expertise and information and experience that we've had over the years to your area and your watershed. So also in the field, the people who helped us in the field, especially besides who I introduced, associated with CUSP, U.S. Forest Service personnel, Colorado Springs Utilities, Matrix Design Group, as well as Wildland Hydrology. These are some of the additional names, some of them are sitting out here right now, who put some tracks up these channels and up these hillsides to help put a lot of these numbers together. As you know, we're looking at a little over 18,000 acres. You're all familiar with the degree of severity and the impacts. Our goal of the assessment that we did initially and then the subsequent design, or the conceptual design we're going to talk about today, had to do with enhancing the hydraulic recovery of the watershed to promote sustainable watershed function. So try to speed up recovery as well as reduce some of the anticipated and impacts, some of which you've already seen. The key or specific objectives associated with the design is based on reducing the risk to life and property, protecting infrastructure, reducing sediment supply from hill slope process, from roads and trails, as well as the channel process, and to try to dampen flood peaks, try to reduce the magnitude of some of that big runoff response to just moderate precipitation events that we've already seen. So the following question, anytime you're involved in this type of work, a lot of questions come about: what, when, who, why, and all this stuff. I'm going to try to answer these questions as I go through a series of slides that will give you some background in terms of where we started, the questions that were addressed to us, and how we have gone about with data collection and analysis to come up with some answers to these questions. Some of these questions are not simple. So the first, you can see we're going to answer questions on what are the impacts and the potential adverse consequences associated with post-fire conditions. Second is, what can we do to offset some of these problems? Can we do anything? What kind of treatments? Number three, how effective is anything we do going to be? Is it going to work? Next is, where do we start? We got 18,000 acres. Do you start at the top of the watershed, the furthest one north? How do we make that determination? Next, how much is it going to cost in terms of an approximate unit cost, in other words, for different type of treatments or activities we would anticipate? And when can we start? No one likes to pay to have studies done if they don't result in some action, some results. It's nice to have research, but in this case, we got a pretty short turnaround time between the fire and some storms that are coming that we're going to have to figure out. We're going to have to get up there in the watershed and do some things pretty soon if we're going to reduce some of these potential impacts and adverse consequences. So this is the key questions of which we've addressed with this approach. And also, as we look at what are these impacts, of course, this photograph a lot of you have seen associated with Highway 24. So we've seen debris flows with moderate floods, not major floods, just because of the change in the watershed characteristics and the risk. And that risk has to do with life and property as well as maintenance costs and problems. The following questions then, as we're going to address this first question, has to do with you can't just go out there and grab designs off a shelf and say, well, let's try this, let's try that. We have to first understand the degree of change and the consequence of change and the location of impairment. Where was the hottest burns? Where are the most unstable stream channels? Where is the areas that have the highest risk and consequence? So we had to do a WARS assessment. which was presented earlier to different groups. The WARS is just Watershed Assessment for River Stability and Sediment Supply. But what it does, it identifies specific processes by location within the watershed spatially and quantifies the amount of sediment and the change in flow and the response of the watershed to a given precipitation event. We look at hydrology, we look at hill slope process, surface erosion, debris flows, debris avalanche, that relates to introduced sediment supply to a drainage system. We're going to talk the importance of sediment and why we have to understand sediment. It relates to many issues that you all face. We have to look at sediment introduction from roads and trails, as well as stream channel processes. And these are the things that we did with very detailed studies. And the books on the back table back there will summarize a lot of this work already been done. I want to warn you, if you start to spend much time back there in those books, you need to pack a lunch because they're fairly extensive. But they had to be to form a foundation for us to move forward to understand where, what, and how much, and what are these risks. Again, the WARS analysis identified 4 major watersheds, of which we broke up into sub-watersheds: Camp Creek, Douglas Creek, Fountain Creek, and Monument Creek were the main broad watershed basins. Within each of those basins, then we broke up additional, boy, I gotta get this right yet. Just a minute. There we go. Now forward. There we go. Sorry about that. There's 89 sub-watersheds that are broken up within these individual 4 watersheds, involving over 237 miles of stream channels, of which a majority of these were hiked and mapped and assessed in detail. And we'll talk about more of that as we continue on. So some of the change we've seen already associated with the hydrologic response, we're finding that just moderate storms, like a 2-year precipitation event, can generate a 20 and 30 and even a 40-year flood because of this response, which is alarming, as it should be. That's one of the things we have to address dealing with some of our treatments. So the effects of mud flows and sediment, as well as floods coming down into your neighborhood, have prompted a lot of direct issues, as they should, which again prompted a lot of our studies. The average annual water yield, and Jim Nankervis ran this model looking at the effects of change in stand conditions, how much of the watershed was burned and what was hot burned. So we actually look at the change in water yield change as a result of the fire effects. As we increase water yield and increase flows, then we have to look at the conveyance system, the stream channels, as well as rills and hill slope process that have to accommodate the increased flow. The thing we found on our studies and the evaluation, and other people, including CUSP, who have evaluated 10 years of post-fire impacts on the Hayman fire, have found that the impacts persisted a lot longer than what was anticipated, or that they were told that within 2 to 3 years it should be back to normal. And of course we found out that's not the case, because the increase in flow is going to last decades. So maybe 70 to 80 years before we get back to pre-fire conditions, because of the drouthy nature of these soils, your precipitation within this area. It's hard to get the site back in terms of mature conifer tree cover. The point is the increase in flow is going to be with us. It's not going to change a lot. The flood peaks is a reality for the future. We can do the most by seeing how well the stream channels and the land system can accommodate the increase in flow. Now, where we can, we're figuring out some techniques to try to dampen the flood peaks for the more frequent floods, which we've already demonstrated and validated will work. So we'll show you some of that information coming up. Water is the driver associated with this, and this is the change that you're seeing associated with the flow duration curve And how you look at this is your normal high flow would be associated with this 1.0 here. That means that's just your normal bankful flow. Well, the duration of time, you can see percent of time for that same flow is increased. Also, for flows above the normal high flow, 2 times that and even 3 times are showing up to be more frequent. So you're going to have a more frequent, higher magnitude flood peaks. So that as a result, that's an increase in energy. So we're trying to understand then how can these streams accommodate the increase in flow. We've already seen from the field results gullies and channelization and downcutting and rills develop as a result of that first storm rapidly. So we know we've got a very susceptible watershed, but we do have some solutions, which we'll talk about. These are some of the interesting results that we can share with you already. If we look at a water yield model, and the Forest Service used a model as part of their post-fire assessment that they did right after the fire. Also, Bob Jarrett with the USGS has a model and a procedure where he's trying to predict increases in flow. Well, we tested this on just taking a half of square mile watershed on these 3 bars to the right. This is the peak discharge in cubic foot per second associated with just a half an inch per hour of precipitation. If we go to a 1 inch per hour precipitation, which is about a 2-year type of storm, then that flow can be up to 210, but the base flow, or the normal high flow, not base flow, but the bank flow, the normal high flow, is only 3. In other words, we're looking at very small basins, but a very big response if we're looking at, if we just get a 1 inch in an hour storm, you're looking at 210. If we're looking at a 2 inch per hour, you're looking at 500 CFS. Well, the yellow is what we've already experienced. The yellow bar graphs are observed values. This is in a 0.5 square mile watershed, which Colorado Springs Utilities is very familiar with, which is Northfield, because in Northfield, they had about a 2-year storm, which is a little over 1 inch in about an hour and 20 minutes, I think, or something like that from the precip data. The normal high flow, the bankful on that stream is only 3 CFS. So that's not a big flow. That flow went to 180 CFS, 60 times greater than the normal high flow with just a 2-year storm. The good news, not that that's good news, but the good news is that the models that are predicting runoff response are actually quite accurate, because we validated or observed values that were pretty close to predicted, because the same storm, the 1 inch storm, would have generated about 210 CFS, and we're at about 180 that we observed. So that's pretty good agreement. Not that that's good news, but we have to deal with knowledge of not big precipitation events can generate big runoff. This is a very key point, because 10 years after the Hayman fire, 86% of all of the sediment continuing to come at an accelerated rate, causing downstream damage, flood issues, maintenance on highways, and the list goes on. Those increases were related about 86% from stream bank erosion, from stream channels that have been sized and are blown out and continue to contribute sediment. So the channel process becomes pretty important. It's something we can help in the presence of some long-term increases in flood peaks that are going to be with us. If we look at already some of the influences of increased flow, seeing the gullies down this road system here, downcut channel and deposition. So we've already seen a lot of sediment as well as increase in flow, adding to adverse effects on channel process. This is just a picture of a debris avalanche, debris torrent. It was up on Coal Basin Creek in Colorado. And this is a big debris flow, not from a fire, it's just a natural process. Now we're going to have an acceleration of that natural process because of what's happened to the vegetation. The thing is here is it takes a great mass of material instantly, which is very hard to predict this. But I'm standing on the road, highway, taking this picture, and there's a stream between the highway and the toe of this big debris flow. Well, they had to put riprap in here. Then they went up and put one of those nets, which the first runoff already started cutting around the side of this net to try to hold back the debris flow, because it went right into the stream and right onto the road. So these are really challenges of what do you do with these processes that give you that much sediment. Hill slope processes we're going to talk about now relate to surface erosion, rills, and concentration of flows. The more rills are developed on the side slopes, then the faster the runoff response, which then affects the downstream flooding issues as well as sediment transport. So when we're looking at surface erosion, we have to be able to quantify how much sediment is coming from this process that's influencing stream channels, that's influencing floods, stability, etc. So when we're looking for the summary, again, this is from covering a lot of country, looking at a lot of aerial photography and post-fire analysis, is we found that as a result of the work that was done, 18,000 tons per year of sediment, and that's not with a big flood, that's just a normal runoff, normal precipitation events that you would expect to see, are associated with 18,000 tons, and that's, again, of the 18,000 acre area. Again, from rills, concentration of flow, and downstream, and also downslope, and lack of ground cover or surface cover, exposed soils. So this is some of the numbers that relate to the tons from hill slope by location. The Fountain Creek drainage had 7,300 tons, or about 40% of the total. That's of all watersheds. Camp Creek had 4,193 tons. That's from hill slope process only, 24% of everything. Douglas Creek had 22% of hill slope process, or 4,000 tons. West Monument had 2,500 tons, and that's associated with 14. Now, these are delivered tons. That's not just erosion on a slope. That's the amount of erosion that is routed and delivered to a stream. So just to give you an idea, 7,000 tons is about, if you're looking at that, that's 730 10-yard end dump trucks leaving the watershed every year. So this is not just a small number. So it can be quite significant, and so we have to be able to address these processes as well. Also, these are mapped areas of high rill densities. These are areas where we see, and I think the red gives you the highest tons of sediment yield from hill slope process. Why this map is important, and you're going to see a lot of the distribution of where the sediment's coming from, and by different locations and different processes. This becomes critical because you can go back by individual watershed, by location, and identify where to concentrate your energy if you're going to be doing, if you can't get equipment on the slopes, putting hand crews out there, you're going to be putting in a lot of effort, but you can't just do it on every acre. So this prioritize what acres are the hot spots, which ones have the highest sediment contribution that we may be the most effective for treating those acres. So we have this distribution here that is mapped to give us a pretty good idea. And the colors that you see, the lighter tan as opposed to the darker tan, have to do with the rates. So the darker the color, the higher the tons per year of sediment supply is by location, by watershed. So this is, there's a lot of effort into this, but this becomes extremely valuable when someone is setting out with a hand crew. Where do we go first? And so we'll discuss this later as we talk about some different treatments that we would recommend to be effective. This is Wellington Gulch, because we can't take the time in this meeting to go through all the detail that was done on every one of these 89 sub-watersheds. So we're going to use Wellington Gulch as just an example, kind of a zoom in of some of the same information we collected everywhere, but just to give you a little better look-see on some of this information. And Wellington Gulch, you can see, is located right here. just above Highway 24. So if we look at the data for the hill slope process for Wellington Gulch, we got 625 tons per year, which is about 18% of the total delivered. And the color tones that you see are basically identified within this subwatershed of where was the highest risk and the highest amount of tons per year. And those are areas where either lower slope position, closer to a drainage network, very steep or erosive but high rill density. That means that those are the higher red flag areas that if we're going to do something in there and dealing with 625 tons, at least we know where we can be more effective at a given location within that watershed. So this is going to be helpful to those that are going to be implementing a lot of the treatments that we are recommending. Debris flows, these are things, a type of process like the picture I showed you where a whole mass of sediment comes down at once, like mud flows, debris avalanche and debris flows. The volume associated with these are overwhelming because if you can look on the y-axis, you're looking at 80 to 100,000, 110,000 tons in terms of, that's cubic meters, sorry, not tons. And as a result, that's a big number. There's no way you can go up in a debris avalanche system that's 70, 80, 90% side slopes and steep gradients and put in chuck structures. People have tried that. It never works. It's very costly. It's high risk. What we have to do, and which we're going to go to in a little bit, is from a geomorphic standpoint, there's natural features of alluvial fans of how Mother Nature took care of 100,000 cubic meters of material by spreading it out and making a landform as a fan. It fanned out and deposited. That was before it got into the main trunk river and filled it up or whatever. So these are things we have to keep in mind because what we develop and what we work with is natural systems and geomorphic landforms that we try to mimic things that are naturally stable rather than muscle up on everything, which is very expensive, but sometimes works against the system. So you'll see that as we go further and develop some of the different scenarios for the designs that we had in mind here. And these are probabilities. And this, again, is the USGS had done a lot of the research and the reports. Some of you probably reviewed some of these reports. So this has to do with the probability as well as the volume of material you would expect. So roads and trails, we're going to talk about those next. The amount of sediment coming from roads and trails we have to evaluate because in some watersheds there's a higher density of roads than in others. But we have to look at the influence of roads on intercepting cut bank subsurface water, and they route the water down the ditch line or down the surface, so it speeds up the time of concentration or the runoff response. It also adds sediment from the cut bank, the road surface, as well as the fill, so it's an introduced sediment source we have to address because the good news is there's stuff we can do to reduce the amount of sediment and the amount of flows that are concentrated on roads. The roads and trails on the whole project area, the whole fire area, accounted for 2,000 tons or 4% of the introduced sediment. Again, those are gravel roads, dirt roads, some of them unauthorized roads, but are still being used, paved roads, as well as trails. And you can see here where some are straddling the ditch is you can increase runoff just like a gully right down these roads as well. So we're going to be making recommendations on dispersing runoff rather than concentrating it and reducing some of the risks and the conditions we've already observed out there. So these are the miles and the lengths and the tons. This is 751 tons per year from Camp Creek. 37% of the total of all the roads are coming out of Camp Creek. Fountain Creek had 619 tons, or 30% of the total. West Monument had about 21% of the total, or 429 tons per year. And Douglas Creek is 236 tons, or 12%. Now, this is from a model that was empirically developed from actual delivered sediment, not just erosion of a cut bank. This is the amount of sediment that comes from the road that gets to the channel. There's a lot more erosion that goes on in the road. This is only the delivered sediment, and that's important because a lot of you are on the receiving end of a lot of that sediment. Wellington Gulch, again, we're going to zoom in on a little different scale so you can get a little better idea of the mapping. The purple is the mapped roads. On Wellington Gulch, we had 395 tons, or about 12% of the total introduced sediment. Okay, and that's 64% of the total roads in the Fountain Creek watershed, okay, are from that particular contribution from Wellington Gulch. Stream bank erosion, another process. This is big. In what we found on Trail Creek in our studies on the Hayman Fire, 86% of all the sediment, total sediment coming off that whole fire, was from the stream banks themselves, which added to land loss and increased sediment delivered downstream, and loss of function of the streams besides. So bank erosion is what we call significant. In fact, we're looking at a lot of areas that we did our studies on were representative reaches, or in other words, typical for a given stream type in a given kind of a location, a given valley, that we then characterize and get very detailed information on, including the erosion rate in tons per foot per year. So then we can extrapolate that to the same stream type we see again at another location. So this is a typical entrenched, impaired stream type, which was on the Northfield Gulch, which is a tributary to West Monument Creek, of which we were doing studies on bank erosion, sediment transport, hydraulics. So we're looking at hydraulic relations, morphological relationships, and sediment. And what we do is we camp there, get all the detailed information at a given location, and then we can extrapolate that data to other similar stream types elsewhere as we see them. Fountain Creek, as a result of the stream bank erosion rates, had 11,000 tons, 36% of the total. West Monument had 7,000 tons, 7,183, but 23%. Camp Creek had 6,700 tons per year, or 22%. Douglas Creek had 6,107 tons, or 19% of the total. Again, you're not going to be able to look and see real close on this map of all of those color codes giving you the different conditions that relate to the stream bank erosion rate. If we zoom in on Wellington Creek, however, you can get a little better idea of the mapping and the color codes that give you the tons per foot per year. So that's for every foot, that's how much tons are going to come out of 1 foot every year. That's just a normal runoff here. That's not a flood. This is only just what we normally would expect at the bankful or the normal high flow. We know that this is going to be an underestimate, but at least we have to be consistent with we look at models that put everything on the same basis, tons per year. And so by length, we get tons per foot for how many total length of that, and that's how we get with total tons. And then we total them all up by the individual incremental contributions of the reaches within this sub-watershed here. So again, if you could imagine going from 0.5 to 1.5 tons per foot, you go put that in the backpack and carry it around. So this is not a small matter. And we've been validating this for years. This is not hypothetical. These models have been validated with actual measured bank erosion rates. The sediment summary then, by the major watersheds that I want to talk to you about, those major 4 watersheds, how you read this particular relationship is on the y-axis here, that's tons per year of sediment. The green gives you the hill slope erosion contribution. The bar graph of the green is how many tons for hill slope by individual sub-watershed within Camp Creek, for example. Now, you can see there's a lot of sub-watersheds within the Camp Creek drainage. Now, within that, this is by location how much hill slope is contributing. The blue is how much is associated with stream bank erosion. The red is how many tons are related to the roads and trails. The black, or the line that you're seeing here, is flow-related sediment. So the others are introduced. That's how much is coming from the hill slope and the roads, stream banks falling in. The increase in flow because of the change in hydrology is showing a very high significant sediment supply as flow-related sediment. Where it says degradation, that means the energy is greater than the supply. So it's going to downcut. You're going to have great energy, and that's what we've seen. And you can see the majority of these watersheds are going to be associated with downcutting or channel incision or degradation. And this is serious because that gives you more exponential increase in sediment. Aggradation means that in those cases, you got more supply than the stream has an energy to move. So it's going to deposit. So that's what's on the left side of that graph. And that basically is Camp Creek. Douglas Creek, again, you can see a fairly high amount of deposition on this one subdrainage here in terms of aggradation. Again, the blue is stream bank erosion. So that's the biggest source in Douglas Creek is stream bank erosion, which is a large number, obviously. And again, these are the other sub-watersheds associated with Douglas Creek. So again, we could spend a lot more time on each individual graph, but if some of you may be interested in this will all be posted on the internet or online for study. We'll have CDs and available that we will distribute to anybody who's interested or wants to get more of the numbers and the details. So again, there's a lot of stuff here. I'm going to try to go fairly rapid to go over enough of this to give everybody an understanding, a feel about what we've learned. This is Fountain Creek. Fountain Creek, you can see the sub-drainages here. They're contributing, again, mostly degradation, excess energy, high transport of sediment. That's going to go down somewhere, and we know where it's heading. So this is why we're urgent, as well as you guys, thinking about what can we do about this. West Monument, there is a data in terms of the sediment consequence on West Monument and the tributes. This is the cumulative sediment sources. What you're looking at here, this is the total associated with Fountain Creek. It's 19,000 tons, 37% of the total. Camp Creek is 11,694, 23% of the total of the fire. Douglas Creek is 20% of the total, or 10,400 tons. West Monument's 10,000 tons, or 20% of the total. Now, the way you look at this color code, this overlays the hill slope process. It's the light tan to darker brown. That's kind of the hill slope. But if you look at these lines in here, that as you get further downstream, you'll notice how the colors go from green to yellow to red. Well, that's how many changes in tons that you're going to generate within that watershed. So for any individual sub-watershed, you could go to any location and get the tons as a result of hill slope and channel process and flow-related increase. That's pretty powerful because this tells you where some of the highest sediment producers are that demand maybe a higher priority associated with treatment. So, what are the consequences? So what? I know we've had previous sessions and people say, well, why are you worried about sediment? And a lot of times people say, well, let's just have a flushing flow. And that next high flow will flush all that sediment. And I was involved in 1976. My job, when I was a hydrologist with the Forest Service on the Arapahoe Roosevelt, my job was to do the restoration of the Big Thompson flood in conjunction with at that time, the SCS. That was 27 miles of a challenge as well. And I still remember one of the discussions is that we had 12, 15 feet of sediment deposition in the canyon. Some places we had that much scour. And they said, why don't we one of the officials said, just open up the head gates of Olympus Dam and let's flush that sediment instead of taking equipment out there and excavating it out. That costs too much. Let's just flush it out. And I stood up and I said, now, if the magnitude of the Big Thompson flood itself was not sufficient to flush out that sediment, just how much flow did you have in mind? Obviously, that discussion was short-lived. So luckily that wasn't done. So we have to understand process. What can we expect a year or two from now? What can we do to reduce risk? Here you got deposition on the bridge and under the bridge. This is from a big flood in Oregon, but sediment is a big issue in terms of maintaining flood capacity and reducing flood stage. Because one of the things that we've finally got a handle on is how to predict sediment. It's taken me 48 years, I've been in this business, to finally get to that point, and we can predict it and predict it accurately. If we don't understand sediment, and we're just dealing with clear water discharge, that's only half of the battle. And we've found that we lose more bridges and more culverts and add to more flood stage because of sediment. We can't take care of it. So it is an issue. So we've got to look at, keeping it in the watershed and not having it all delivered down country. This is on Coal Basin Creek as well. If the stream here, they built too high a width depth ratio on that bridge, and this graded underneath of the bridge. So you've lost channel capacity because of sediment, and that raises flood stage because of it. This is deposition in one storm on Trail Creek from the Hayman fire that filled 5.8 feet of deposition just in one runoff event. So the top of a 6-foot box is what you barely see sticking off that sediment deposition. So they had to put culverts across here to try to get some drainage. So again, that someone didn't understand sediment transport that installed that structure. Also, this is on the recession limb of a flood, showing how much deposition in a high width depth ratio environment that occurs, which adds to flood risk because of the sediment. So it's not just the discharge, it's both. And this is already associated with the Waldo Canyon fire in that first storm in July that was only from a 1/4-inch storm that generated this mud flow and the sediment going out up onto the floodplain. This is an aggradation process. I wanted to show this picture that this guy thought, well, I'm not much of a flood risk up on this high bank. Well, guess what? The bed raised up about 4 feet. And now that guy's in the active channel. This is the problem with sediment aggradation flood risk. We've got to understand how we can reduce sediment, but if we, in the presence of sediment, how can we route it where it is available? It's a natural process. We just are an accelerated natural process, if you will. So we've got to figure out how to route sediment to keep our flood capacity and our flood stage down. And we've been doing a lot of work on that. So the consequence of the flood stage has to do with the excess sediment deposition, loss of riparian vegetation, and flow resistance. This adds to a lot of impacts, flooding impacts. If we take out the veg along the banks, that's our flow resistance. That maintains low width depth ratio, narrower and deeper channels. But if we take out that veg, it widens the channel and induces more deposition during the flood. And then you've got problem because you've raised flood stage. So vegetation is very important to maintain river stability and bank stability, as well as not adding that sediment to the channel, as well as maintaining velocity distribution to keep flood stage where it should be. Land loss, property damage, again, stream bank erosion, lateral adjustment, long-term problems we've seen in this county and elsewhere in the state and throughout the country. So the good news is we can do something about it. Long-term instability and loss of function. So again, when we have unstable channels, we have high bank erosion, rivers that are down-cutting. As soon as the stream incises and abandons its floodplain or its surface, then all the high flows that are going to be coming at you are banging against the walls. There's not a relief. So that's where we get this accelerated sediment from the stream banks and the bed, the downcutting. This is just a diagram recently put together here to show flood stage change due to sediment. And the sediment we're looking at here is that if we maintain this cross-section of that much width and depth and velocity, you can move the sediment and not really affect this particular flood stage of a flood-prone area. But as soon as the bed elevation comes up and we start to aggrade the channel, then everything comes up, including the normal high flow stage and Now we're raised up for the same discharge. We're at a higher stage, and that puts people in flood risk with a less magnitude flood. So you got to deal with sediment. Next big question, so what? I see a lot of thousands of tons. I see a lot of bank erosion problems. You got pictures of stuff that looks pretty tough to take care of. The question is, what can we do? What is the direction we can take? Can we offset these adverse consequences or these impacts? So that's the next question. Knowing that we have, these are the delivered sediment from the hill slopes, especially the rill locations, these little red dots, that's where the highest tons of delivered sediment is going to be. If we know that, then we can concentrate a lot of our efforts in those particular areas. If we look at, again, our hill slope objectives, dealing with trying to reduce sediment, is increase our time of concentration, basically slow it down, try to get more infiltration into the soils, reduce surface erosion processes by more surface cover, ground cover to reduce raindrop impact, particle detachment, as well as overland flow, the development of more rills, and reduce sediment delivery. Those are the objectives for the hill slope treatments. Some of the things we've talked about here is adding ground cover, because once you get about a 50 to 60% ground cover, the research that Robichaud and others have done on the Hayman fire have shown that you're got about 95% reduction of the surface erosion. So that's pretty good information to know. So if we can do things with mulch, with roughness, different treatments, and including log sills and other things we'll talk about, to discontinuously plug rills. You can't go in there and plug all rills, but if you do it discontinuously, it breaks up that continuous length of slope that adds to building up that head and adding more erosion. These are some of the design solutions which are in our conceptual design. These are log sills, so we call them sills for rills. But basically what that is we put these they're bedded so that they intercept any water that concentrates down the rill, and they'll slow down that, induce deposition, create infiltration, and reduce that velocity and reduce downcutting further, because a lot of rills become gullies. So basically that's what the plan view, the cross-section view of these look like, as well as the longitudinal profile view. Also, on areas where we have very steep slopes and it's hard to get up there, we build toe catches on a bench adjacent to the streams to keep that sediment from going into the channel. And these are called a log toe catch. Again, they induce deposition, which then provides a microclimate and an opportunity for seeds to establish and have revegetation. So revegetation is the long-term solution, even though that wood eventually is going to deteriorate. If we can buy about 5 to 7 years to be able to, number one, reduce the sediment going into the stream, number two, provide a catch of fine sediment, hold moisture in that, we then have an opportunity to grow some veg. And it's the root mass and the long-term function of the vegetation that's going to help reduce that contribution of sediment from the hill slope directly to the streams. This is a summary of the different design solutions that we put together that represent rills process, how we're going to try to reduce some of the rill problems, ground cover issues, where we're going to try to increase ground cover density, and reduce that direct routing associated with rills, for example, or right next to the toe of the slope where the channel is. Mitigation techniques are sills, log sills we just talked about, gully plugs, discontinuity to break up that continuous channel or the rills, mulch, seeding, tree plugs, toe catches, as well as a bankful bench. Again, these are marked appropriate for hand or mechanical methods. Surface roughness that's going to be contributed as a result of that method or that treatment. How much is that deals with surface protection to prevent particle detachment. And again, breaking up the soil impact or the raindrop impact. Flow dispersion, we'd like to disperse runoff, not concentrate it. And grade control, because we don't want the rills downcutting to become gullies. So this is kind of a something we put together to help make that evaluation. Now we're going to talk about some of the design objectives dealing with roads. Roads, we're looking at trying to reduce a lot of the stream flow increases where we concentrate water in the ditch line or on the road surface or down the fills. So to do that, then we're looking at putting a lot more cross drains, more frequent on the road surface so we don't run water so far down a ditch line that becomes a stream channel in itself. Dissipate flow below culverts because we get a lot of those head cuts and down hydraulic jumps, if you will, and we've got big scour below the shotgun culverts. Stabilize conveyance channels. In other words, some of these can start out as a gully right below the culvert and they continue. So we're going to have to look at stabilizing some of those channels. Address unauthorized road usage, which again occurs. Challenge for the Forest Service. Relocate high-risk roads. In other words, some of these are right in the bottom of the stream. We're going to have to look at some alternative because they can't occupy the same place. Stabilize decommissioned roads better than what's been done with just a gate. That doesn't necessarily close roads because people know how to get around gates that we've been seeing. Here's a case for what we recommend. We've done these in the past. We'll actually take a road that's not being used, it's not needed, and we actually pull that material, the fill, and put it into the cut bank. What it does, it makes such a side hill that the four-wheelers don't like to get it because it'll roll over. So you only have to put a gate up. You know, anybody in their right mind, you can try to drive that better. And as soon as I said that, there's going to be somebody who's not in their right mind that's going to roll. And we'll find them somewhere at the toe of the slope. But what's neat about that is what we've done is, let's say you had a fire. Again, you can't imagine that here. But if you ever had to need that road again, instead of having several years of subsurface flow interception, all that disturbed area, the compacted soil, the difficult to try to get revegetation, you can actually go up there and pull that cut out again, that material out of the cut bank, put it back on your field, use the road. So 20 years later, if you have to go in and do a timber harvest or whatever, at least you haven't lived with 20 years of contributions of road sediment if you don't need the road in that intervening years. Now we're going to be talking about channels, channel process, channel restoration. These objectives primarily to look at increased natural sediment storage because there are certain systems that are associated with alluvial fans or alluvial flats that you want to have deposition on. Not perennial streams, but on ephemeral systems in certain valley types. We also want to reduce stream bank erosion. We're going to try to reduce the channel incision or degradation or lowering of the channel bed. We're trying to dampen the flood peaks, slow things down with this design. We're going to look at reestablishing riparian function. Okay, we got to reestablish the veg. That is going to be very important for long-term stability of these stream systems. Reestablish channel connectivity. This is one thing we found on Trail Creek and a lot of our studies on the Hayman fire, is that the streams, when they downcut, they abandon their floodplain or their alluvial fan or a surface that naturally disperses energy. So when those streams downcut, then what happens, there's no escape, and we end up with tremendous erosion and channel enlargement every subsequent flow. So this is a long-term serious problem. So reconnectivity back up in these watersheds to those surfaces give the stream a natural place to disperse energy. Channel restoration processes then are, we basically have to determine the natural stable stream system appropriate for that valley. So that's one thing we do is we always hunt a stream that's functioning without our help, that's had the fire, that's had impacts, but yet hasn't come apart. So why is that? So that's kind of our blueprint or our model that we use, trying to understand the natural stable stream type. We then develop design scenarios, different treatment methodologies we would use based on the stream type that's existing and the impairment associated with that, the valley type, the valley width, the valley slope, and materials, etc. So that we're developing these design scenarios, which we'll show you, by stream type and by valley types. We then use native materials for stabilization. So again, vegetation, trees, or whatever rock we have locally. We also disperse flow energy by reconnecting these incised channels to either alluvial fans or floodplains. Okay. Also, we try to provide sediment storage where appropriate, because the more we can store appropriately in a stable manner, the less we're going to have to deal with down country. You're going to see some maps that say A, B, C, D, these different designations. Well, those are designations of a stream type, of a stream classification system that I developed several years ago. What this does is denote a gradient, a width-depth ratio, whether it has a floodplain or not, the morphological characteristics of a stream channels. We know that in the basins that were studied, every one of the stream types that are shown here that are, I found throughout the world. I haven't found any more than those major types. The only one that's not present is the anastomos or the DA. All the rest of those stream types occur out there on the Waldo Canyon fire watersheds. But they're different streams. They offer different hydraulics, different morphology. You can't make them all the same. In other words, you got to be able to understand what the stream should be versus what it is. And if we're going to stabilize it, what do? How do you stabilize it? Do you make it straighter? And this has been the problem. We've been forcing on a lot of our systems, these stream channels, making them too straight, putting levees, putting oversizing them in terms of width, trapezoidal channels, and that's not the stable form. So one of the things we've got to be clever about, and a lot smarter, is we have to work with the system, with the central tendency of rivers that will want to be stable. The reference reach is just that. It's the stable blueprint. This is what we use to study streams that are self-maintained and self-formed and that maintain their physical and biological and chemical function. Why is that? And luckily, they exist, even in areas that are developed watersheds. They don't have to be pristine. They just have to be stable, that they're not aggrading or degrading, they're not enlarging. They're basically, year after year, appear to be the same, okay? So we have to know what the stable form is, because that's a goal. Interesting thing about this picture, this is a reference reach on West Monument Creek that just had that big flood go through it, probably less than about, 2 months earlier than this picture was taken. And that stream didn't change its dimension, pattern, and profile. It had thousands of tons of sediment go through it, but you wouldn't know that. But if you go upstream, and if you go downstream, the Colorado Springs Utilities did, it's like two different worlds. And I remember when we first discovered this, I got pretty excited. I said, hey, there's a reference reach. And that's a B4 stream type, which you'll see that in that chart. Now, in this case, if you want to take a few minutes and memorize all these different scenarios, I just showed this up here just to give you an idea. These are 16 different stream succession or channel evolution scenarios that we have data for. These are actual rivers. This isn't hypothetical. These are rivers that start out as a certain type, and because of impairment or disturbance or something, because of climate change as well, as we've seen this naturally occur, but now we were accelerated because of the fire, that we've seen streams downcut. So a stream that, in fact, this is a very common one here. If we go from a sea, it started out on a floodplain. It downcut. And when it downcut, it become a gully. And then with excess energy, it blew out the banks, continued to downcut, and then it widened. We had some deposition on the bed, but never did really come back up to this original surface. And because of that, it couldn't reconnect because of the width constraints of the valley or slope. The stable form turned out to be a B stream type. Little c means less than 2%. But the point was that ended up to be a stable stream type. Why that's important, in a lot of times in development in these watersheds, people have made a camp on an area that used to be a floodplain, stream downcut. So you can't always raise the channel back up. Like, for example, this scenario would have been raised back up if we says, hey, let's just put it back up. If it downcut, let's put it back up on that surface. Well, that adds some flood risk. So what we find is that you can have a stable stream that has some lateral constraints that still has a flood-prone area and can be stable, just like the reference reach B I showed you earlier on West Monument. But you'll notice not all streams have the same scenario. So our job is to know what is the typical scenario, what's the central tendency of the river to be the stable form. Second, what stage is it at? Is it a G or an F? What's the stable form? Is it C? Is it a B or whatever? This becomes very valuable insight that tells us we're just following the central tendency of rivers of nature that says, hey, if I'm going to be stable, here's how I'm going to end up. And we've done studies for one system for 17 years to trace this evolution, which is on Wimminooch Creek back down out of Pagosa Springs, Colorado, following spraying of willows. But nonetheless, we have some great data, but this is very valuable for this project because we have to identify what is the sequence that we would expect to see, what scenario that then we're going to design that matches the central tendency of stream succession to the stable form. As a result, we're going to go through an example here of basically a stream successional scenario 6, okay, which is you start out as a B, which is a pretty stable stream, but because of the fire or because of straightening or whatever, the stream downcut. It abandoned its flood-prone area, and then it widened to an F. And both banks are eroding, contributing an exponential more sediment. In fact, an F channel is 4 orders of magnitude more sediment in tons from stream bank than the B. Same flow, same valley, different stream type. So again, it behooves us then to think, well, maybe we better go back to a B again. Okay, that may be our reference reach, our target, our potential. So here's a good example of a G stream type, a gully, tremendous bank erosion and downcutting. Then it widens out to an F in terms of a high width depth ratio, a lot more deposition you're seeing in the bed. Banks are contributing to sediment. This would be the reference in the same valley type where, again, it's not a real broad alluvial flat. It's pretty narrow and moderately steep. And this is around a 2% or 3.5% slope, as I recall correctly, at that location. This is a step pool morphology. That's a reference stream that flood had just gone through 2 months earlier, but you wouldn't know it. So that's what we mean by, hey, we like that. So this is why we have to understand what constitutes the natural stable form. These are the different design solutions. We call these typical design scenarios. I'm going to go through an example of these that we've instituted or implemented on Trail Creek watershed following the Hayman fire. Also, some of these we're already underway with on the Waldo Canyon fire in 2 different locations, which we'll talk about. So the first discussion is going to be, after we go into those individual scenarios, which you'll see again, is we have to have specific data for each one of these typical representative or impaired reaches. So we have to have the morphological data, the slope, the width, the depth, and sinuosity, all that stuff. Then we have to know the bankful discharge, which we develop curves by drainage area, so we know. Plan view alignment, what's the geometry, the cross-section, typical cross-sections, long pros, the riparian vegetation that presently exists, cut and fill computations, stream bank erosion prediction, and flow-related sediment, competence, ability to move large size or capacity. So we have and develop the models to be able to predict all this for a given location where we have this data. Then we can extrapolate that condition for that stream type elsewhere, because believe me, in the 6.5 or 7 months of this effort of the WARS assessment and the design, you can't do this level of detail on 257 miles of stream channel. But you can do it very detailed at a given location and then extrapolate that for the same stream type, same condition, same valley type elsewhere. So this helps us to be more efficient. This is a zoom in again on Wellington Gulch, showing stream types as well as condition. So the pour is going to be the red, and you can basically read, I don't know how well you can read that from where you're seeing, but you can see A's and G's and F's or whatever from where you're at, hopefully. But that is, again, they're mapped in very detail on every one of these subdrainages. And these miles are kept track of by condition, and this is where we're getting bank erosion rate by that stream type, by that condition, from the very detailed work we've done that represents that condition at that location. This is why this took months of field work just to get on the ground and put your nose on it and document your observations. This is the first of the design scenarios. This is what we call scenario 1 is a D4, a poor condition, to a C4. A D is a braided channel, okay? And the C channel is a single thread meandering stream in an alluvial valley. So this is a project we did already on Trail Creek. This was a braided channel. This was 3 foot of deposition higher than the floodplain because they had channelized it, high width depth ratio. Also, remember that box I showed you that had 5.8 feet of fill? That was just downstream of that. So we had to change that stream type to be, because there's a house, they actually had to move up off of that floodplain, put up on a terrace because it had got filled up with water. So basically what we did was to reduce flood stage, to reduce stream bank problems, and also this is a fishery, so we had to get migration of fish back up Trail Creek because this is a barrier. Just from a depth standpoint, let alone what's going to do when it gets to those culverts. They're going to have to get a climbing rope to get up through and out through the culvert. So anyhow, this is the after picture at the same location. So this is a C meandering stream. These willows were transplanted with front end loaders. We put in structure again to buy time to keep the stream from downcutting, dissipate energy, and tow wood along through here for habitat, but also to maintain the width depth ratio, the stability. So year after year, flood after flood, this area is not going to fill up with sediment. It's going to route the sediment through that area without contributing from its banks and its bed, but doing it in such a way that we don't put the neighbor back into flood risk. Also, this transports 84% more sediment. This is running our sediment transport model than what the braided channel would do. It also reduced flood stage by 3 feet. So it was very effective for that objective. Next scenario is a F4 entrenched channel converted to a B4. Okay, B4 little c, less than 2%. This is what that channel looked like. So you can see the amount of bank erosion and the sediment. And some of you, if you ever have an opportunity, if you go at the mouth of Trail Creek over by West Creek, you can just park right there and start walking upstream, and you'll see all of this work that's already been accomplished. But the thing is that you got F4 stream types here too. And you have a similar scenario that we could apply here as we did on Trail Creek for the same objectives. So what does it look like today? That's the same location. So again, we had to narrow the stream, make a flood-prone area to increase flood capacity. And, oops, sorry about that. Why am I going backwards? Okay, so what this does, this scenario, by converting an F4 to a B4, it reduces the bank erosion by 465 tons for just 1,000 feet of channel. That's how much savings we have. Why this is important that we have to keep track of this is that if someone says, hey, we're going to pay you some money to go do restoration, how effective is that restoration at being able to reduce some of the problems, stream bank erosion being one of them? So can we also improve fish habitat? Also, does it improve value? It looks more natural. It's not like that condition. So that's what we don't want, and that's what we're trying to get away from, and that's what we did in a matter of, and Brandon was running that particular project, but in just a matter of a couple days, that's a transfer in that location. So you can actually be very effective at reducing a lot of these adverse impacts. It also was 81% more efficient at routing sediment without aggradation and an increased flood capacity. That means for the same flood magnitude, the stage is going to be less. It has more capacity. That's because it's going to handle the sediment and doesn't add 465 more tons. Plus, it can handle the sediment from upstream coming into it, and that's why you have the problems with flood issues. The next scenario we're going to talk about is one of the recommended solutions. throughout the Waldo Canyon area where this stream type occurs and where it's appropriate and where the risk is high, is a gully or G4 converted to B4 stream type. What that is now you got this gully. So what we do in this case, this was a G here, and now we made that into a B, and that's what it looks like. Again, we used a combination of rock and logs from on site, very close. The funding of this, by the way, was kind of spearheaded by Carol Acarius with CUSP, with also cooperators from the Forest Service, the National Forest Foundation, Vail Associates, and all kinds of people that decided, hey, this is a good thing to do. We want to be part of this. So again, another example of neighboring up with other entities who want to make a difference. This example here is reducing the bank erosion by 655 tons per 1,000 foot of channel, reduces risk of down cutting, which is not going to, these are grade control structures as well as stream bank erosion reduction, and increased flood capacity. Again, this is one of the things you want on a stable channel. Another scenario would be if I have a unstable meandering stream like this here, bank erosion was high, high width depth ratio, a lot of bars, a lot of deposition, real poor fish habitat. How can we fix that? Okay, and these are all at the same locations. You take a look at the mountain peak there, and there's the same peak. That's now created a meandering, stable, low width depth ratio, same stream type, but it's a stable stream now that'll be sustainable, but it has a floodplain. So it has a way to disperse a lot of flood energy, which is what you want. These are grade control structures that allow sediment to transport but not contribute it from the banks or down cutting. The consequence of the C4 change, unstable to stable, is you're going to reduce 40.7 tons of sediment per 1,000 foot of channel because the bank heights aren't as high. Also, 85% more efficient at sediment transport capacity using the sediment model. So you're not going to have aggradation that adds to flood risk or raising the flood stage, which is very important. This is one that you want to pay particular close attention to because we have been implementing this for the last few years, and it's been a very successful direction and a design scenario. This has taken entrenched, steep A channels, G channels, and F channels and converting them to a braided channel, but on an alluvial fan or alluvial flat, where the braided channel on ephemeral systems flow only in response to runoff is the stream type. So here's a side tributary to Trail Creek that every runoff was always active in downcutting and contributing thousands of tons of sediment. So what we did, this is presently, you're looking at a F stream, entrenched, high bank erosion. You can see it's pretty obvious. This is also another picture of that same gully, if you will, but it downcut from a G, widened to an F. And basically what we did was we put in a series of these in-channel sediment detention basins. The reason we needed to dig the basins was to get the material to fill the gullies, both up valley and down valley of the basin. Also, the basin stores sediment. Plus, when it does eventually fill up, then we want that water and any sediment mixture to spread out over that surface and deposit on the surface, because that's an alluvial fan or an alluvial flat on an ephemeral system, that's the stable form. So a D stream or braided can be the stable form, and we found this to be true in these environments. This picture was taken after a runoff had occurred and you had no gullying. So we actually carved those channels to be able to disperse flow energy. What that's going to do is create more infiltration. So it slows the velocity. The gully before, when you got the same storm, would give about 4 to 5 feet per second velocity. Now you're dealing with a half of a foot per second velocity for the same water, same volume, but it's spread out over a wide area and pretty shallow. That induces deposition of the sediment, but also it slows that velocity to add infiltration, so we're not delivering as much of that flashy runoff from that previous gully down to Trail Creek. good news associated with that is that same storm, July 30th, that got you on West Monument Creek, and the damage we saw there, it hit here too. This was not 0.5 square mile. This is about 1.3, I think, square mile drainage area, 1.5. But the good news is that rain and the sediment never made it to Trail Creek, where before it always did, and that's why we went there, because it was such a major problem. So what we're finding with this approach is that we're dampening the flood peaks, creating storage naturally, and not having to go back and do maintenance, because even if those things do fill, and it's going to be years, we figured some of these are going to be 30 years of life before you'd have to even worry about maybe a capacity. By then, hopefully the watershed will have receded and vegetated and slowed down a little bit, some of our delivered sediment. This picture right here is important because this shows us the longitudinal profile where you actually make a basin. Then we put a little log crib wall here to keep it from head cutting up that A channel. We use the volume from this excavation to fill the gully. So if you look at this cross section, then we have to fill the old gully up even with that surface of the fan. That allows then, when the flood waters hit, to spread out. Remember the picture I showed you, the debris flows, the debris avalanche? Big volume, rapid. Those you can't store in a little check dam. You can't put structures and hold back a lot of these. And if you do, there's going to be a lot of maintenance if they hold, and they're not cheap. If you can then get below a debris flow and make sure you build the fan or connect a fan function, that debris flow is going to spread out over that whole fan and just get wider. And that is key. Now, one of the things I saw following the Hayman fire, which I thought was unfortunate, somebody went up with a dozer down the tributaries into a fishery stream, which was the, I remember the name of the channel from the Wigwam Creek, and they took a dozer and cut a channel right down through the middle of an alluvial fan to make sure all that sediment would go right to the stream, instead of spreading out onto the fan before it ever got to the stream. So not only were you increasing the flood response and the peak flow, but you were routing all the sediment that came down that over-steepened channel. This was not smart. And I know people, our intentions are great, are golden. Sometimes our performance is less than sterling because we're not quite understanding what we're doing, but we're trying to do something. So what we're trying to do is to at least follow the lead of nature. What is an alluvial fan? Why do they work? And how do you deal with debris flows and debris avalanches that are, I would tell you what, you don't stop those, but you can be at the toe of them and have a home for them when they hit the base of that slope. And this is a very important concept, and we're going to look at that, doing a lot of these, because for the dollar spent, they're unbelievably effective in terms of the volume of sediment that they can retain and how we kind of slow down the runoff. So that's what this looks like. So we're going to reconnect alluvial fans. Another close-up look, we're going to put in a crib wall to prevent head cut on the gully. This is dug out, and that's now a sediment detention basin, which doesn't really attenuate the flood peaks as much as the fan does once the water gets up there for infiltration, but it does have some active storage if it doesn't have any water in it before the flood hits. So you got some active storage of the basin. But it's to store sediment primarily. When that fills, again, of course, it's going to spread over the fan. This is now the braided channel of the fan, and this is now a filled gully. So some of these we have to put in line, depending on the slope and the size of the drainage area to make that effective. This is a typical cross-section view of what they look like when you're going to fill the gully. This is a crib wall to prevent a head cut. And again, this is the braided channel that you're seeing associated with this particular valley. Okay, filled gully. It's called Scenario 5. So here's one right here, a gully up another tributary to Trail Creek, which was contributing big runoff. This is the depression or the debris basin that we built. That has 11,200 tons of storage. I don't know if I forgot to go back and Brandon put that on there for me, or I think we did. No, yeah, there it is. Forgot to. I apologize for going too fast on this one. This particular series of 5 basins, and I think that cost somewhere about $3 or $4 a ton of storage for this construction. And we did this. This was not 2 months. This is a matter of like a few weeks of work, 3 weeks of construction. That'll store 15,000 tons of sediment and also attenuate flood peaks, 15,000 tons. So that's not a check dam. Okay, that's pretty impressive. That I think this is a good way to go following natural systems. This one will store 11,000 tons. It's a fairly wide, big alluvial fan. We just filled the gully and reconnected the fan. Then when you get a bigger drainage like this, then we made even a bigger basin, which is going to store 43,000 tons of sediment from the upper watershed. Remember, this is still producing all these tons of sediment 10 years after the fire on Hayman. So a lot of people think and hopefully you don't think that on this fire, that in just a matter of 2 or 3 years, it's going to stabilize. The problems are over. That's not going to be the case. These are some long-term problems that we're going to try to reduce some of the damage from if we can get on top of this. This is a crib wall right here to prevent the head cut. Looking downstream, this was the gullies, and these are now filled from the material from the basin. So again, the material from the basin is used to fill the gullies to raise them back up. And the logs there just to reduce likelihood of rill or any gullying on that new surface of soils. That's all. So cusp, I think, by now has already seeded and maybe mulched this particular area. This is on National Forest land. A lot of cusp volunteers have been up all over this place seeding and mulching and helping getting the revegetation and some of the gully controls that are contributing sediment to these basins. Okay, this is the F4B to B4. So here's another example of conversion. Again, before and after, same place. This is Trail Creek. Okay, and this again reduced 465 tons per year of over 1,000 foot of channel length, 81% more efficient by changing that stream type. So it's not going to raise flood stage, it's going to handle sediment and increase flood capacity. Another is a A to A plus, in other words, a stable A, unstable A to a stable A. Okay, so here you can see this is contributing a lot of sediment. This is a reference for an A. It's a steeper gradient, lower width depth ratio. Step pool morphology. This is 34 tons per year per 1,000 foot of channel from this system compared to the A. Prevents head cuts as well. It's a grade control structure. It also dissipates flow energy because these are steeper gradient step pool streams. And the last scenario we'll talk about is going from an A to a B little a, which you're going to have to change the shape. So again, it's energy dissipation, grade control, log steps. Okay, that's saving. Wherever you're doing this, you can actually quantify for how many lengths of this, how many tons of saving for whatever treatment we're doing. Also, this stops any head cuts on those A channels that are problematic. It also dissipates flow energy during these higher floods. These are different type of structures and different design solutions. This is what we call a J-hook. These are going to be for larger rivers. We put these on mostly perennial streams, like on Fountain Creek and areas like this where we have bank erosion problems, where we still want to have sediment transport capacity, decrease flood stage. These also decrease stress in the near bank region with this log vein root rod J-hook combo. But these are a grade control, step pool, cross vein system. We can use those with bridges to protect the bridges as well as increase flood capacity, which they increase mean velocity without eroding banks. These are log roller structures that are grade control, similar to that picture that I showed you earlier on the A stream type. Here's a good example of a project we've done in Colorado on use of logs, steps, and rollers to dissipate energy and add grade control. These are tow wood, and this is a structure we would use on Lower Fountain or Lower Camp and other areas where there's meandering streams with more perennial flow. Basically, we've put in tow wood rods and cantilevered logs that add flow resistance. They don't come out, by the way, because they're bedded in deep. And we put transplants or soil wraps, basically vegetation, to add the long-term function. Tow wood is probably one of the most successful structures that withstand unbelievable floods. It gives the best fisheries, but it protects banks. So this is sediment-producing subwatersheds. Okay, those are the individual combinations of subwatersheds, are these locations. And you can see the 1, 2, 3, 4. These are the locations from Douglas Creek to Williams Creek to Wellington and on, where these are the high sediment yield producers, not necessarily the highest risk, but this is where we're getting a lot of sediment. And as a result, this is the summary of each of those 10 watersheds of the how much precip you would see for that area, the bankful discharge, water yield change, total bank erosion rates, the actual as tons per year, the sediment from the roads, and the hills and the flow-related sediment. Okay, and that's how that is distributed in some of those 10 watersheds that are contributing. Again, if you look at this, shows you where we start, again, gives you where the highest yields of sediment are, the highest surface erosion contributions from hill slope process. We also, if we break this up again, this shows within this watershed here, these watershed combinations, if we're going to spend money for reseeding or mulching or whatever it is, dealing with hill slope process, then rather than fly 18,000 acres, because it costs about $2,500 an acre to aerial apply seed and mulch, then you would at least say, hey, these are the hot spots. Well, you're going to find that about a third of the area is contributing about 90% of the sediment. Now, that was an important discovery because you can be efficient by not treating everything, but by going to those areas that you're going to be the most effective at as it represents our map data that tells us where we got the problems. Okay, so the high priority treatment areas, again, going back to our friend over in Wellington Gulch, is that these areas, either where we have real densities that are high or different kind of soil conditions, but this is the ones that tell you that are mapped that have the highest sediment contribution to hill slope process. So we know where to go. This represents the top 10 watershed priorities associated with channel process in terms of tons that are applied to treatments. So we can look at the, I don't know if you can read this very well from where you're at, but these color codes are telling you where we would do scenario 3 and 4, where we would do scenario 5, where we would actually do things by location, by sub-watershed. Okay? Now this is the blow-up of that same thing where you can actually look at, here's a case where you're doing the single thread scenarios 1 to 4 or 6 to 8. Here's where we're going to do a sediment basin with equipment that you're seeing this red here. We're trying to put a lot of these sediment basins down the lower end because it's going to take some time to get up all the way through the basin, and this is a catch for a lot of the flow as well as that sediment. So these are where the hand crews are identified of, again, the high-risk sites. So we've actually taken the treatments, put those located that represent the highest risk areas and the processes. As a result, we'd look at the total length of all these watersheds, total length treated, the amount of reduced bank erosion, and the amount of sediment stored related to these processes. So you're looking at treating about 33% of the channels in those top 10 high-risk watersheds. In this case, is taking care of about 1.2 million tons, or 73% of the bank erosion, by treating a third. Now, I don't know if you understand the significance of that. That means we don't have to go out and take care of every 273 miles of stream. It means that it tells us where we've got to go, and we can be effective at 73% reduction on just 33% of the stream length. This is important because that's the value of WARS, is it gives us a better understanding of what, where, and how much, and so what. And this helps us direct our designs. Again, the hill slope process, again, we found that if we take 53% of the area, we can actually take care of 91%. Whoop, didn't want to do that. Go back. There it is. By treating 53% of the priority areas, we can take care of 91% of the delivered sediment.
Actually, that's 53%
Sorry.
represents 91% of the total sediment.
Well,
We can reduce 69%.
okay, and of the total contribution of the everything, that's pretty important. Then that location of those 10 watersheds, by treating 53% of that, then at least that's taken a pretty big cut on the total amount of sediment, or 69% of the delivered sediment reduction. So again, it helps us to understand the distribution of this. The next is how much it's going to cost. All we could do is talk about some unit costs associated with this work. And the reason is that we've been doing this, and so we're getting some idea of some unit costs. Now, how many of these we do and how many crews we have out there are going to make a difference on the total cost, and what percent of the basin do we treat But this basically is looking at, on the single thread channel restoration, those different scenarios. They're going to vary from about $25 to $44 a lineal foot that we've been seeing for our work in Trail Creek. Sediment detention basins are between $1.70 to $10 a ton that we save of storage. Aerial seeding and mulching, as I understand, as some recent bids, is $2,500 an acre. Aerial seeding and mulching. Hand crews can vary from $1,000 an acre up to $6,000 an acre, depending on the level of difficulty, the degree of work, and the access, as well as the extent of the work required. So it's not cheap, but at least you have some idea of the rates that we've had some experience with. The last, when can we start? Okay. And you're thinking, boy, I'm ready to end. Just because this has gone longer than I thought. However, I get a little excited and carried away because these guys and some of you others have spent a lot of time out there, and talk about this in just a few hours is a challenge, but I'm trying to get through it. When can we start? We already started. It's already underway. We've already doing work and have been underway on the Northfield Gulch, sediment detention basins. I've been working with Colorado Springs Utilities and their personnel and their contractors in implementing this already in Scenario 5. And I've got the design for you for the rest of the B channel going down and connecting to the West Monument Creek. That's completed, and it's in that write-up. The next is the North and South Douglas Creek on the Flying W, of which we started last fall and are working as we speak today. And that's been funded on the Flying W by the NRCS with EQIP money, and again now with emergency watershed protection funds that have come from Congress associated with this emergency work. The summary is this. The restoration work and the things we've been proposing is going to reduce a lot of the flood risk from the more frequent precipitation events. So instead of having a 30-year flood from a 2-year storm, we're trying to actually dampen and reduce that. However, the potential catastrophic floods, which will come based on the big precipitation events, which will come, are still, you're going to be living with them. So if you're camped on a floodplain, pack your bag and have it ready to go. This is not going to take away those risks. It's still going to be a problematic with big floods on floodplains. This is just going to help reduce a lot of the magnitude of more frequent floods and hopefully reduce those impacts. So just know that we still have issues of risk. And we'll end up with here is that some people are still at risk where they've made a camp right at an outflow of a surprise at night. So I don't know if that's you or not, but anyhow, you have now been exposed and probably have been for some time. Thank you very much.
I think Dave will be around if you want to ask him individual questions. I just wanted to let you know that we are going to get this presentation and the full watershed assessment information up on our website. We should have it up on elpasoco.com within the next few days, or probably by early next week, so you can reference that.
Oh, shit.
Okay, Carol says it's already on waldofire.org. Thank you for letting me know. So, not the video, and yeah, and we will be working on getting the video posted on the YouTube channel for El Paso County, and I'm assuming that the city will link together with the City of Colorado Springs. So, thank you all for coming. I don't think there's anything more, but Dave will be around and his team, so feel free to approach him individually. Thank you very much.
Yeah.